meeting to order. We'll start with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. We will get started by reviewing and signing payroll and accounts payable. We have current payroll in the amount of $31,848.99. We have accounts payable in the amount of $123,656.46. We have an ACH payment to Swayze for $241,000 even. It looks like we had a little bit of an uptick in overtime. I don't know if that was
Storm coverage.
storm. Makes sense, hurricane coverage.
And hazardous waste day.
And hazardous waste. So we had 25 hours of police department overtime, 23 hours of fire department overtime, and 4.5 hours of highway overtime. Did we have any significant town damage from the storm? I know we had the one tree that held up the school bus.
And there was trees down on Pickpocket and Middle Road, the bigger ones.
No major structural damage or town building damage, right?
No. A near miss for one of our police officers, but he could run fast enough.
A near miss? Oh, okay. That's good.
Thank you.
All right, we're all set?
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Have a nice night.
You too.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Switch chairs.
You have the good chair?
Yeah.
I'll take a motion for the consent agenda.
Move. Second.
In tonight's consent agenda is the rec manifest, treasurer's report, and building permits. There's no minutes in tonight's because we canceled last week's meeting. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
And I'm an aye, so that's a pass. We'll now open public comment. As usual, if anybody has public comment, we'll ask you to come up so this microphone here on the counter, on the edge of the counter here, can pick up your comments. Anyone interested in public comment? Come on up.
It would be something new, is that,
You're welcome to speak on whatever you'd like.
okay?
Come right up. If, can you maybe pull that other chair over for her, Paul?
Oh, it's okay, I can stand.
Either way.
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with, just so you can be picked up by the video.
I'm Deborah LaRoche, I live in Crowley Falls Road here in Brentwood. And what we are having, or had an issue with, is across the highway from us, right next to the right-hand side of the, what's the name of the place, Sandy? The Mahoney's, to the right-hand side of Mahoney's, that land was purchased. And right now, it is being leased out to another company, and they're bringing in a lot of stone there. The original agreement with that property is that they were only gonna use it as a storage pad.
Storage what?
Storage pad, they were just gonna store stuff there, there wasn't gonna be anything else going on there. My original question at the meeting, because I was at the meeting for this being in abutter to the property, is that what is the noise level going to be? And I was told that there would be no noise. The only thing that we would hear are the trucks leaving in the morning and coming back in at night. Well, the owner has since leased out that property to someone that is bringing in stone. And they were running a rock crushing machine 7 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day. It's extremely, extremely noisy, and it's not something that they were approved to do. So I had called the town office and had registered a complaint in reference to it.
Who did you register the complaint with?
Jennifer,
Jillian?
well, I thought she said her name was Jennifer.
In the planning board office?
And she said that she would speak with the code enforcer in reference to it. So I actually came in last Wednesday and spoke with Mr. Greenwood about it.
Okay.
And he advised me to come and approach you folks tonight. He said what they were doing was not something that they were authorized to do. The sound has since gotten better, but they were supposed to come before again with another proposal for the use of the property, but he said as of when I spoke to him last Wednesday, they had not. I want to avoid the noise of that rock crushing because not only is that, they have the big trucks coming in and out of there all the time, and when they're dumping that load, they're smacking that tailgate, and I'm not exaggerating. The sound is just, goes forever. And even people on South Road have even approached me and said, how can you stand listening to that? And I said, I can't.
Absolutely.
You know, I wouldn't even go out in my backyard and use the pool because the noise was just so loud. It just was so uncomfortable being out there. The rock crushing machine, I don't believe is there anymore, but Mr. Greenwood did indicate to me that those machines, you can transport them from place to place, so I just don't want it coming back because they're not, he said they're not in compliance of what they had proposed for the property.
What's the address on this again?
It would be to the right-hand side of Mahoney's. I should have done my homework before I came on the map. So if you're looking at Mahoney's, Route 125, they're directly to the right of them,
There's
right there.
north. There's a ton of aggregate there right now. You can see it from
There's a ton of rock there, piles.
on 125.
Yeah, okay.
Like just north of Heaven.
Yeah, yeah,
When's the
You
next
have
plan?
Mahoney's, you have
When's the
this
next
place,
planning board meeting?
Thursday.
And then you have with
It's a
the school.
planning board enforcement issue, correct?
That's a change of use.
It's a
Yeah.
unapproved use
Right.
That is
situation,
correct.
so
He
it'd
said
be a
they're
site plan
non-compliant right now, so that's why Mr. Greenwood told me to approach you folks in reference to it.
They were running this from 7 AM to 7 PM, 7 days.
7 days a week.
You
So,
couldn't use our backyard.
I mean, I can see, it's a completely different scenario. We've been here for many, many, many years. And I can see if we just moved in and that business was there and they had a permit to do it, it's just like the dragway. People don't like the dragway. Well, if you move into the dragway's already been there. You know you're gonna hear that noise. Well, this is a totally different situation. It's not what they were approved for.
the planning board can make a decision on Thursday that this isn't, they can officially make a decision that it's not an approved use, and then they can inform the select board, and then we can actually take action next Tuesday when we receive a letter from the planning board saying they're in violation of their site plan, and then when we have that documented, we can take up a decision we can have a vote to take actual enforcement action.
Okay.
So the planning board, Paul's the planning board rep, and he can bring it to the planning board.
Yeah, Thursday's meeting is at 7 if you want to
It's
come
7.
to that.
There's a
But I'll
meeting
certainly
this week.
report back, as well. I don't recall, I don't know if you do, Doug, that specific property?
They're authorized to have pilings, and it was, as long as it wasn't used for commercial use, for purchasing back and forth, they were gonna take loads out. We never authorized,
Rock crushing. Yeah,
That's change of use.
yeah.
There's also, the person that is running this has something to do, and forgive me for not knowing the name, but down on Route 125 on the Plastow-Kingston line, there is an aggregate place, and in there, the company, it begins with a T. I do not know the name of it. I probably should have taken a ride down there to see the name on it, but I believe he is
Oh, I know who you're
one
referring
of
to.
the parties that is there with the rock. And from what I understand is that I believe they're going to be selling rock out of that location. And I didn't, again too,
Out of Plastow? They're selling it out of the Paso location?
No,
Or
right
you're
here in
moving into the Brentwood
Brentwood.
location? So
At
it's
the
coming
Brent-
from Paso to Brentwood?
The gentleman is from Plastow, is the one that is utilizing right here in Brentwood, the rocks. And there's possibility that they're gonna be selling also from there, which means it's gonna be truck after truck coming and dumping, and then the bulldozer's running again, dumping all the, whatever they sell into the trucks to haul away. It's just, I mean, the noise as far as the crushing, that's not happening right now, but the dumping of, the dumping of the trucks is. So,
Thank you for bringing this forward. So that will go on the planning board agenda for this week to discuss.
yeah,
We'll certainly raise it, yeah. And
Yeah.
feel free to, come to the meeting on Thursday at 7
7,
here.
all right,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
taking the time.
Thank you for coming.
So, Andy, you have it up on the map. Do you have the name or address?
I'm trying to find the,
Just be good for the record to have the
Yeah.
actual location.
trying to find it.
That's still.
Mahoney's
This is the
is,
donuts, right?
Oh,
um,
that's the car dealership. So maybe that one.
sure,
It's this one. I think it's this one.
Maybe under Grenese, Brentwood LLC? There are two lots, GRANESE, Brentwood LLC. I'm assuming it's one of those lots, if it's two up from Heavenly Donuts.
so 45 is Mahoney. About 54 with 125 is Mahoney. So I think it's lot 100. Yeah, Grenese.
It's lot 100, which is 62 Route 125.
62 and 66.
Yeah, that's Grenese Brentwood LLC.
Yeah, because it covers two. The building is on the south side of the lot, north side of the lot.
Isn't that building gone?
100 and
I think that building's there because the next lot 101 is, oh no, that's where the school buses are.
I think the building's gone.
I think it's,
Was it 100 and 101 or just
So it would be 100,
Just
right?
lot 100?
So map 224, lot 100.
62, 125. Okay. Any other public comments from the crowd? All right, seeing none, we'll close public comment at 6:13. Moving on to discussion action items, we're gonna have a discussion about cost of living increases. Last year, we ended up having this discussion a little bit later in the fall, and we decided we wanted to move this up as early as possible once we got financial information from Three Bearings, so that this board could discuss and vote on how we wanted to do COLA and/or merit increases for all of our employees well in advance of performance reviews for all town employees, so that we had that sort of set up in advance. And we have now received that information on September 8th from Three Bearings. And so Karen, maybe I'll turn it over to you to kind of describe the information that they send to us every year.
So last year, their prediction was 5.2% for COLA, and then the board authorized up to 2.5% for merit. So it was not to exceed, so everyone received at least 5% last year, and then not to exceed 7.5% last year, which was still below the 8.7% that Social Security Administration had approved last year for inflation. The numbers this year is, the estimated rate is coming in with a range of 2.5 to 3.5%. So they're using 3% as a good indicator as inflation for this year. Today we had a staff meeting with department heads to see where everyone was in terms of what they would like to propose in their budgets. And what we would like to put forward is a cost of living increase at 3% and then up to 2% in merit based off of performance reviews. So all employees would be eligible for the 3, and then depending on performance, if you're on a performance improvement plan, which nobody is, they wouldn't be eligible for a merit at all. And then depending on your rating on your performance review, starting at 3%, or starting at a 3 out of 5 score, it would be a 0.5% notch up to 2% total.
So you'd be eligible for either a half, 0, a half, 1, 1.5, or 2
Or 2.
would be the max.
So then, right, so everyone would get 3 and then not to exceed 5. Unless a specific department was putting forward a wage adjustment for whatever purpose that was going to be for.
Do we anticipate any wage adjustments?
I anticipate 3 for specific employees.
Okay, and those will be brought forward during the budget
Yes,
process?
during those individual budgets.
So
And-
wage adjustments as opposed to what we're talking about? Is that-
Right, so these are just the COLA and the merit increases that are sort of standard across the board. The wage adjustments are a closer look at individual job descriptions and making sure that those job descriptions are staying competitive with the market. So that's the move that we've done the last couple of years, and we've covered the vast majority of all of the departments, and now some of the departments there's a couple of positions that still need a little bit more work.
They were more like, you could call them like market adjustments that weren't really like annual, yearly adjustments. They were competitive market adjustments that were done for most employees over the
Yes.
past 2 years. And just to remind everyone, sort of the way we were thinking about this last year is that the COLA is essentially somewhat tied to inflation and essentially is not a raise for employees because that just keeps them basically level with what they're getting paid now. And then the merit is a true potential raise for them based on performance reviews. And I think last year, what was the kind of breakdown? The bulk of employees kind of fell in the middle, like what did we see for performance?
Last year, the
pay?
bulk of them, it was between 6 and 7%, I would say, is where most employees
So
fell.
most people got the middle to high end of performance.
Right, so I would
reviews.
say where the max is 5%, the majority of employees will fall in that 3.5 to 4.5%.
Comment or thoughts from the board about the proposal of a 3% COLA with up to 2% merit?
I guess my question would be, is there funds available to do this?
Well, it will be built into the
Be
24
processed.
budget. Just to give you an idea, Rye is doing a 3.75% COLA. Exeter is doing a 3% step with a 2% COLA, so they're falling right into the 5% range. Lee runs on a fiscal year budget, so they just approved their budget starting July 1 of '23, and they're going with a 4% COLA and a 2% merit. So I think if we could stay competitive with our neighbors, I think falling between that 4 and 6%, so offering that 5%, I think would keep us right in line with all of our neighboring communities.
So to answer your question, Paul, we don't do raises till April 1st after the budget's approved. So this is just helping the
Future.
department heads prepare their budget to present to us.
So what does that mean, like, in terms of a gross increase? Like, what would 5%, what's the number? Is there,
Probably ballpark it.
Payroll is,
annual payroll, I guess, times 5%, whatever that is, right?
And I thought it was interesting that in this financial assessment, that it was kind of an optimistic forecast about hoping to see inflation continue to come down and settle down in the low 2% over the next 10 years. So, because I think historically, that's where some of this, had been more like in the 2s. So last year was definitely an anomaly that this board decided to kind of match inflation, although we did downshift a little bit compared to the COLA that the federal government was offering for Social Security, because we thought that was on the higher side.
so about $90,000. So So gross payroll in 2022, wages and OT was 1.8 million. So 5% of that is 90,000.
So we're not about ballpark.
So that's 12 cents. Assuming no other revenue changes.
Other comments, thoughts about 3 plus up to 2?
I'll move the 3-2.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Sounds reasonable.
Okay. And I'm an aye, so we will pass that with a 3% COLA across the board guaranteed with up to 2% based on performance. And that will be established in advance of performance reviews, so all employees will know that going into review season.
Thank
And
you.
that will be built into budget planning. Great. Proposed amendment to Select Board handbook. So this is a follow-up from discussions we had had earlier in the summer. Months ago, we had referenced the original Select Board handbook that had described how to do committee appointments. We had decided to follow that process, which advised doing committee appointment discussions in non-public. Paul had expressed specifically, and some others had advised that, it was worth discussing whether it was best to do committee appointment discussions in non-public or public session. We agreed as a board that we could see pros and cons of both and decided to put the question over to legal counsel. And then Karen, I don't know if you can kind of give us an update of what legal counsel came back with for that.
Their opinion is that the vast majority of the conversation should take place in public session with limited circumstances that would allow you to go into non-public session. So if you know that there's a material information that would impact someone's reputation negatively, then they would support that being done in non-public session. So I think it's just case-by-case basis depending on what information we may have on a particular candidate.
Which makes sense. Which I think is challenging in and of itself, as that's inherently subjective in everybody's view, but I think is up to the board to, deal with that circumstance. And then Paul, I think after that information was received, you had taken your initial amendment and changed it up a little bit.
I tried to simplify it.
Okay. Do you want to re-present what your most current suggestions are?
Yes, so the proposed amendment, there are 2. The first deals with the issue that you were just discussing, which is instead of the default position going into non-public, the default position would be to go into public and then setting forth that we would be permitted by the statutory reasons under RSA 91-A to go into non-public, which we would always have those reasons, but it changes the default position. So that would be the first amendment, and I think that's consistent with what we've been recommended to do. You want me to present the second amendment as well?
Sure.
So the second amendment, my sense from our conversations previous was that there wasn't really a momentum, if you will, to have a full change in terms of setting forth various factors on making committee appointments. So all I'm suggesting in the second amendment was to strike the term ideology, which was one of the terms that was in the handbook. I just feel like ideology is not something that should be part of the equation. What should be part of the equation are those things that are talked about in there, which involve person's background, their qualifications, their willingness to commit, and ultimately their willingness to be invested in the committee and going to those meetings.
So instead of, I think you had in prior had kind of proposed kind of criteria, but the board had felt maybe that was a little too restrictive. So instead, just taking out that word is your suggestion.
That is, I mean, I'd still stand by my criteria.
Yep.
I just, if you recall, I had come up with that, I think at your suggestion.
Yeah,
But there didn't seem to be momentum for
Yeah.
that to proceed, so I
Yeah.
would at least propose the idea of striking ideology.
okay. Board discussion about these two amendments?
Just catching up, is it an amendment to this?
To what
or
the
is it-
current select
Oh,
board
so-
handbook states,
Okay,
which
Previous-
I can pull out, I have it in here. Yeah, you
just
have it.
making sure I have the right starting point for what we're.
So the current section that this would modify is that right now it says, in making these decisions by majority vote, the board should always discuss individual qualifications in non-public session, except for positions that are subject to future elections, in which case all discussions must be done in public, and all application materials are subject to public disclosure. So that section would be stricken and would be replaced by this sentence at advice of council, which would just reverse that and be the majority of the discussions would be in public session unless there was something in particular that would necessitate under 91A to go into non-public. So we just replace that one sentence. And then the second part was, the last sentence of this says, ultimately decisions to appoint should be made based primarily on a candidate's qualifications, experience, track record, and ideology, even when considering reappointments. And Paul's suggesting we strike the word ideology and leave qualifications, experience, track record. Thoughts on that?
I'm just gonna be candid that I've lost track of
Amendments to the
where I
amendments.
was.
This is
Uh, Okay, so my understanding was like back, let's see, July 18th, this,
Yes,
It's gone.
that's gone.
okay,
This is the newer, streamlined,
Got it.
shortened version.
that was the big question I had.
Yes. Are
So,
you
th-
okay
so this
with
is
this newer
that
version?
second amendment is literally just addressing the existing language.
Yes.
Both amendments are
Right.
existing.
And that existing language was written by a prior board,
Correct.
which I think none of us were on other than maybe Andy.
Yeah,
So it's just changing language written by a prior board,
yeah,
which I think was lifted from another town, honestly. So it's just us cleaning it up to something we feel better about.
yeah. Well, as far as the conclusion, I don't have an issue with either amendment, but I would like to discuss a little bit further. I mean, we can vote or not, but I just have some questions, I guess. One is, do we know, do we have a sense of what other towns do with this? I should have asked that question, I guess, a while back, but, I mean, are we,
I don't know if we really know.
You mean like through the application process?
are other towns discussing it in public? Like, my stance on this was if legal said public, then so that's where I'm at.
Mhm.
But I'm just curious if anyone knows if other towns go in that direction or whether they discuss them in non-public.
That I'm not sure. I haven't done a deep dive into other communities to see how they do appointments.
So regardless, I guess, do we anticipate any issues from a legal standpoint when it comes to reputational issues? And the reason I ask is because, so we'll go for, I'm anticipating this will pass, and that's how we'll proceed. But if we're in public session, we're discussing nominations for boards and commissions, committees, and we, speaking candidly.
Someone feels disparaged.
Yeah, someone feels disparaged, perfect. Are we vulnerable at all, is what I'm getting at. I mean, obviously, we don't want to be in that position, we're not gonna just run around disparaging people.
Right.
That's the last thing we wanna do. I'm just saying that if we said something that was interpreted by someone, an applicant, as disparaging, which I think we already had mentioned, it does put us in a little gray area. Are we at risk? And again, the reason I asked that is because if we were to find out other towns are doing it in non-public for that very reason, to sort of protect. But obviously the flip side of that is that if you have a board or a majority of a board that wants to make appointments to town boards and committees based on favoritism and inside dealing and the old boys network, whatever, that's not good either. So just throwing that out there,
I think one way potentially around that is if we put language on the application saying, by applying, you understand that your application will be discussed in public session. I don't know if that, we've got a lawyer on the board. I think applicants understand that they're applying for a public volunteer position, but I think that's a really interesting question you bring up. And I think you're right. I don't think it would ever be our intention to disparage anyone in any way. But I think that's an interesting question. I hope it wouldn't ever be an issue.
As individuals, I don't think that we're liable, but I think that because we're acting in our official duties as electeds, but it may open the town up.
Well, I think there's two separate points to address. I think if a resident is applying for a public body to be on a public board, I think to some extent they're waiving some expectations of privacy. Their
Right.
applications, their qualifications should all be addressed in public session. I think comments that may be made that could be interpreted as disparaging, I think the level at which it would have to be made to show material reputational harm would be high, right? Like, they can't just come in here and say, you disparaged me, hurt my feelings, and then sue us. Well, they could do that, but that doesn't mean that they would win, that they would meet that level. They'd have to prove that there was irreparable harm that was caused by whatever statements were made. And I would think before you were heading down that road, you would shut down the conversation.
And I think you would also have to show that the disparaging remarks weren't fact-based. Like, if you were just shooting out disparaging opinion, then yes, you're slandering somebody. But if you're having fact-based comments,
About something somebody has said
Right.
or done or, behavior or statements. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And I do think there's a difference between, disparaging is kind of, I'm not sure it's the right, way to put it. There's certain, things under the statute which, affect reputation. As Karen says, it's a high standard. It would have to be something that, has to do with, maybe they're involved, with something with the town that, taxes or things of that nature that, or something that, affects their reputation. But, merely having discussion about, people's qualifications and like we've had, more than, there are more than what the amount of, the number of positions, so unnecessarily we're gonna have discussion that it may involve, making judgments and weighing one person against the other, but that isn't what 91A speaks to.
Right.
So.
And I like your point, Karen, about there is some waiving of that basic privacy by submitting your resume and your position statement to the application process.
and I think constitutionally, there's been a broader look at 91A that public employees need to be disciplined and held to a higher standard and not be done behind closed doors. As we saw with the Chief Wick's release from standards and training, like, there's expectation now from the courts that this information not be kept under seal.
Right, that there be transparency.
that all makes sense to me. I guess the only thing I was going to say was, so looking forward, well, first looking back, we've made some tough decisions when it comes to these appointments. But I think, I mean, in just my own personal view, great strides in improving a lot of these boards and committees. We've created some new ones, had great people, great volunteers in town step up, and we've just seen a lot of great work. When you look at, as I was driving in tonight, I was thinking about all the different groups and everything that's going on from, rec, economic development, energy, communications, all of it. So a lot of good has been done, but I do think we've made some tough decisions up to this point, and there'll be more to come. And part of that is that I think we've seen from this current board that we want to not only look at qualifications, we want to look at people who are have a track record of working toward supporting the mission of that particular board, committee, whatever, as opposed to fighting against it. And that's where some feelings might get hurt going forward, but that's certainly not, I'm certainly not using that as an argument against anything that we're about to decide.
And in fact, track record is actually in the wording right there.
Sure. So,
A move to accept Paul's two amendments.
We'll just do them separately for the record.
We can either do them separately or together. Since they're on the same paragraph in there.
Second.
Do you want to do them together?
Sure.
He does them together. Can we get a second? All in favor?
aye.
And I'm an aye, so we'll make those two changes to the select board handbook. Thank you, Paul, for bringing that up and for your flexibility in changing them. And on a related note, what would be next up on deck for committee openings for our future planning purposes? Do we have that kind of on our?
We need to do some reappointments of standard positions, Wayne Robinson, Joe Bird, Bob Mantigari, those just need to be regular reappointments. And then as far as commissions, it would be coming up, the ZBA positions are still open, no one's applied to fill those. And then 2 rec alternates will be opening, Andy and I talked about that, we'll open those for October 1, so that they'll have 30 days to submit their statements of interest and then have a rec meeting November, December to bring their proposal to the select board for the end of the year.
One thing, this may not be a reasonable request, but I was wondering if that's something that we could sort of have as a running sheet, like, like
That was-
each week or, maybe it's not every week, but maybe it is, because sometimes it'll be static. To have that to see coming up, we have, is that all
Or we
right?
could do it monthly or quarterly or something,
Whatever-
so we
whatever
don't
you think
lose
is
track of
best.
anything.
Yeah, just having a good heads up on these appointments, I think, we've talked before about, you see them, you're like, oh, we gotta sign these.
Yeah.
It's like, those days are over.
I think if you create an Excel spreadsheet, which you probably have, and just put it on POS drive, you can open it and see it all the time. And
Yeah, maybe we
if
go
you have a
through it.
question, you can just go into your drive, open it, and okay, that's,
Yeah,
Or maybe some
Save
sort
a tree.
of notice like a month in advance anyways. Is that sufficient?
yeah, I mean, I think that's a good, I
Can
think
you look at the
anything,
What?
uh-huh.
Well, and I think with our new process anyways, Russ, to your point, the old process of just appointments coming across the desk and being signed is not, that's extinct at this point now with this board.
With the third,
So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
not gonna happen anyways.
Yeah. Whatever works, but just checking in regularly, so we do have enough heads up. Because another reason for that, oh, by the way, is like spreading the word.
Right.
A lot of times people say, oh, I didn't even know you were taking applications for X board.
Right,
And if we're bringing it up, people here and people who are watching on YouTube are hearing about it, and the word gets around that, maybe we'll get more applicants.
yeah, definitely. So next up is rec alternates, it sounds like.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Moving on to regular business, sounds like Karen, you've got a couple things for us.
We have there was an abatement that was filed from PSNH that goes back to 2017. all of the cases were stayed and they were moved to Merrimack County Superior Court. They just finished the final structuring order, so that's set to go to trial in September of '24. What we have done, there's 50 communities that are all in this in various years, but we all use George Sansucci and the same council. And so what we've done is they pool all of the legal costs together and then prorate our portion. So they're expecting that our portion to get us ready for trial and through trial is $10,000 from Sansucci Associates, which is our utility appraisal company. So this would just be to update and sign this contract as we prepare for trial.
And remind, so this was,
This is a utility update that PSNH filed back in 2017. And so they filed, in Brentwood, it's just 2017. In some communities, it goes upwards to 2022 and '23.
and why did it end up in the courts?
Because so many, they filed an abatement that was denied, and then it was appealed, then they filed that with Superior Court.
Okay.
And then because there were so many of them, they pulled them all together and moved them to Merrimack County.
And is this coming towards closure?
That hopefully, with trial set in '24, hopefully they'll set,
24.
hopefully we'll come to a settlement agreement prior to getting to trial. So the budget is set at not to exceed 10,000, which will include in the 2024 legal line. And then any costs that are over and above that, they will push out into the '25 budget so that it won't overrun anybody's '24 budgets.
And what have we been paying on this yearly up till now?
So our traditional utility appraisal cost is just the standard $14,000. We've been paying minimal legal fees to Walter Mitchell's office on a prorated basis. It's been between $50 and a couple $100 every couple of months as they've been rolling this forward. So this bulk of the cost is going to be just trial prep.
So this is like the biggest chunk of the
Yes.
whole legal cost is this one
Yes.
time, and this will go to one-time budget line
Yep.
item, okay. Questions?
Yeah, so is this just for Brentwood, or is this for,
It's $10,000 would be Brentwood's portion of their cost. There's 50 communities that are involved in this pool here.
so do you know what the total is? Or what,
A
$10,000?
lot, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
it does, certainly does.
Times 50.
That's quite a,
Oh, this is the list of towns here. It's like significant.
so
From
what,
Antrim to Whitefield alphabetically.
so what are they talking about in terms of needing for a trial budget? I mean, if there are 50 communities times 10,000, that's like 500.
Right, so some of the work is unique to Brentwood and some of it is going to be pooled together where they can pool their resources and break them down in between the communities. And
So
we'll
it's
break
not
that down
10,000
in
per, necessarily per community, it's based on,
It's based off of our specific need.
so, and just so I'm clear too, this is, Eversource has its, for lack of a better term, right, so it has its poles,
And conduit,
right, on
Yep.
town property, and they're asking for to pay a lower amount to the town,
yes,
right?
yes.
And then, so we join other towns that all have,
Yes.
Sansucci is sort of like, he kind of like gets everyone together and
He
joins
is-
forces.
He has all of these towns' utility appraisal.
Yeah.
So you can either use a private appraisal company to put forward your assessment, or you can use DRA's numbers.
Yeah.
Most communities don't lean on DRA's numbers because they're significantly lower than what an appraisal company will assess them at.
Yeah,
It does look like, Paul, it says, each town is paying 2%. Our current estimated budget for each community is 10,000 total for all of 2023 and 2024. So that would be what, 500,000?
Yeah.
I don't know if
Big
that's,
bill.
if that's, I mean, for 50 towns, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, that sounds like a lot, but.
Andy, any history related to this that you
So,
can share, or?
The poll tax battle's been going on for
A long time,
a
right?
long time. We've already paid one settlement.
We did, New Hampshire Electric Co-op filed one and we paid out a settlement agreement to them.
So, I mean, for what we could have to pay out to the 10,000, it's probably money well spent.
Do we know what the potential exposure is on this?
For the 1 year, I think they were still calculating, I don't have that number off the top of my head for what the assessment is.
I don't think it's that.
100 grand or?
When we did, when we did New Hampshire Electric Co-op, it was $80,000 a year for 4 years that I believe that we rebated it back. So the potential, but that was several years of an abatement.
Right.
This is just the 1 year that's outstanding.
I'm just trying to kind of weigh the $10,000 versus the, what our exposure is.
But Eversource's utilities, that's the bulk of the utilities in town is Eversource.
Right.
Big co-op probably has 10% of utilities,
It's
so
much smaller. The value is
if
much
it was
smaller.
80,000 times that by,
I'm assuming at this point, we can hash this out and bemoan paying $10,000. I'm assuming we've essentially already agreed to be part of this 50-town
We have,
coalition.
and they have already, Sansucci is supporting the numbers that they've already provided to us and have been providing to us for decades.
Where are they at?
Sansucci, they're in Lancaster.
they're not a law firm.
No, Sansucci is the
The
utility appraisal. So
appraiser.
they work in conjunction with Mitchell Group. So they provide the numbers, then Mitchell provides.
So this is one of those situations where there's a history here of us doing this. And seems like your recommendation, you support this course. From what I know of this kind of thing, it seems to add up and make sense in terms of the town, making sure it's covering itself. So I'm gonna be supportive of it.
Is that a motion?
It's a motion.
Second.
And I'm sorry, one last question.
Yeah, okay.
So this line item for legal for 10,000 pertains to their expert fees, not Mitchell's? Is this just for
This
Sansucci's
is just for
expert costs?
Sansucci's.
We would increase our legal
Yes.
line item by 10,000 from what we had the prior year, presumably for this.
So for getting this consultant ready for trial,
Yes.
that's not Mitchell's cost, who's?
Correct.
Oh, okay, all right. And Mitchell is the one representing us in the case?
Yes.
Okay.
So I have a motion and a second, all in favor? All opposed? And I'm an aye, so that's a pass. It looks like we all have to sign this.
Yes.
And do I
On
just
this
sign
side,
this side?
Just execute a contract with Sansucci for the utility abatement. I have a fixed price agreement with Suburban Propane to lock in 11,000 gallons of propane for $183.
Oh, that's really good.
So they had started at $199, and then there was a conversation that went back and forth on the listserv, and Hampton Falls was getting $183. It was a typo. She told me $138, and then I was like, where'd you get that?
Like, 138, yes,
And she's like,
fine.
oh, sorry, that was a typo. It's $183 through Palmer. So I reached back out to Suburban and said, hey, if Palmer could do it for this much, why can't you? So they've agreed to match that price.
Is there any thought it will get any better than this as we move forward, or probably not?
I don't believe so, and they'll also extend this rate to all town employees and the select board.
And I think, I went on the New Hampshire fuel website, on September 9th, I think the average propane in the state was 3 something a gallon,
Yeah.
so
$3.
183 is
It's really good.
They do have some fees associated with it, so it's not a strict 183, but it's still only a couple more cents a gallon after you figure in the fees.
So this is for 11,000 gallons pre-buy, basically.
Yes.
Is there a motion to sign this fixed price arrangement?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. Looks like maybe just I have to sign it.
Yes.
Let's see, Planners Council.
So that was
on Thursday.
I'm sorry?
Who's that for?
Suburban.
Palmer gave the same price.
State of New Hampshire Department of Safety has an emergency notification system which all towns are eligible to utilize. That was previously through Code Red, and through their latest bid, they're switching providers to Genesis Inc. So they will transfer all towns onto that new contract at no cost if you'd want to stay. If you would prefer to stay with Code Red, we would have to execute a separate contract and pay those costs separately. So I just wanted to gauge the board's interest. We don't use it a whole lot, so I
Do
figured
we
we'd
have
just
our
say,
own access, or is it still that we have to go through the state?
you still have to go through the state, and they give you give them a list of who's allowed to use it and at what level notification,
Is there a cost associated with the change?
not with the change, no.
Only if we stay with Code Red. What, can you outline exactly what this service looks like when we have an emergency? Like what we get through this program?
We've only used it on a couple of occasions, so if we have like an incident where we want to shelter in place, we would have the emergency management director call into the state, put that notification in, and then they would post that out to all of the residents in the community.
So it's reverse 911. So
Gotcha.
if something happened at the school, you could go a mile out, you could go 5 miles out,
Okay.
you could go 10 miles out.
And that would be automated through the state.
Yeah. And then anybody that has signed up, the biggest issue is, I don't know how the new company does it, but Code Red, you can sign up. So if I'm in Lawrence, Mass, and Lawrence, Mass issues a Code Red, it'll notify my phone because I'm a Code Red subscriber. I don't know how the new company will work, but if we don't go with the state, we'll have to pay for the service. And I know that's a fairly good sizable fee, so it's worthwhile staying with the.
And how many times have we used Code Red over the years?
I would say just a handful.
Handful.
We don't use it often.
So using money for that system doesn't seem to make a ton of sense.
I don't think so.
The only difference is the state requires an emergency purpose, whereas if you had your own, you could say,
Trick or treat, it's delayed.
yeah, you wanted to put out a Code Red because we delayed trick or treat, or, 125 was gonna be, Prescott Road was gonna be paved, please avoid Prescott Road.
We can have a sign up for updates, especially with the new websites.
Right.
So we
So,
can,
when using the state free system, it's only for emergencies,
Right.
so, if you had a missing elderly person or
Yeah.
a missing child or something.
Gotcha.
make a motion for the transfer into the new system.
Second.
All in favor of switching to Genesis Inc. through the state?
Aye.
And I'm an aye, so we'll do that switch.
Karen, could you just ask how they're gonna do cell phones when you,
If there's the ability to do that sign up function.
And then the second note on here is just an update. DRA had a public hearing to update conduit costs to assess to telecommunication property. They had that hearing yesterday. There was no changes in our valuations, but we had to wait for that step to be completed before we could finalize our MS1. So we'll be working with Jim to do the merge on all of our values and then finalize the MS1 for you guys to sign next week. The MS1 is the form that it shows all of the values of property, commercial and residential in town, and that's used to help set our tax rate.
So that was just a correction that delayed it a little bit?
Yes.
Okay.
Wayne has something he would like to discuss with the board too. So,
One other thing I wanted to, I don't know if can you hear me the mail, John? There was a notice from Epping, just if there's any public interest that I wanted to just bring forward here from the mail. I don't know, Karen, if you know anything about this, but we get notices from abutters. Here somewhere. So we received a notice from Epping that on Monday, October 2nd at 7:15, there will be a public hearing concerning a request by the New England Dragway to waive the provisions of the bylaws relating to the regulation and licensing of motor vehicle racetracks. The public hearing will be held during the Board of Selectmen's meeting located in the Town Hall meeting at 157 Main Street, Epping, New Hampshire. I don't know what this is about, but if anyone's interested in what's going on with the Dragway, sounds like they're looking for a waiver of some type. I I don't know if you've heard.
So what I
about this?
understand is they do BMX practicing and they're looking to start racing BMX bikes and they are extending that into the month of November.
So it's just a minor thing?
It's just a minor thing. I spoke with Chief Inter and he said that shouldn't be impactful to us or our details at any.
Okay, great, so relatively minor. Whatever it's the dragway, I'm like, could be minor, could be major. Okay, so sounds minor. Great, okay. Any other mail or signage, just, okay, Wayne, did you wanna come up for us? You had something for us?
Do we need to open that still?
It was a duplicate of the Clear Victory letter.
Well, I got this year's price for, from Morton Salt, for the salt for this winter. It's $69 per ton,
What was it last year?
7207.
Good news.
And I also got this from Eastern Minerals. They sent me a quote too. And their salt was $71 a ton. But I just want to stay with Morton Salt. They've treated us pretty well. And I wanted to, well, use the same tonnage that I had last year, because I used 2,248 tons last winter.
Was that a lot or not?
What's that?
How does that contract with
The year before.
historicals? Yeah.
Was that a bad year, or?
No, not really. We mix it with sand. We mix the salt with sand, but we just barely made it. With the what storms that we had, because we had a lot of ice last year, and I know we used more. Plus the school didn't have the time off, I don't think, as much as last year, and we had to keep ahead of the school buses when they had school. They didn't call it off, and so that puts out a little more salt, 'cause during the day, if they get put out, then we try to go ahead of the school buses to cover the town, so that's a little more, we use a little more salt, but with what storms that we have, and I didn't go up on the salt, just take the chance. And how much I do have sand down there. We're bringing 1,000 yards of sand down there. We got it almost in right now. Most of it's all there. So we did change that a little bit. Usually I get 1,500, but the way the price is on the sand, it was 68 cents higher than last year. So what we're gonna do, we got 1,000 yards of sand coming in, and if I need any more, Chris will haul it in as I need it. Trying to save down a little bit on the sand. I can have you guys sign this if you okay it. You sign it so I can get it in and.
And we kept that budget line like the same from prior year, right?
Last year, in 23's budget, it was increased significantly to accommodate the higher price.
But then we kept it,
We kept it from, it wasn't one of the lines that was budget cut.
so the fact that it's gone down from 72 a ton to 69 a ton will actually save us a little on that budget line.
Yes.
Okay.
Motion.
Second.
Ooh, tie. We'll give it to him.
Seniority.
All in favor of approving the 69 a ton for the Morton salt?
Aye.
I'm an aye, so you're good to go for that order. You need
Okay.
us to sign?
Okay.
Yeah.
You want-
Yeah, bring it on over.
I think there's two of them there this year. This one here and
So
then
the
also
name
this
and title.
one on that page. And that's my mom, that we
you want me to fill out the rest of this and
Yeah,
I'll put it in
you
your
wanna
mailbox
fax-
tomorrow?
You wanna fax it to
Sure.
him? That's good.
How many parts sand to salt, just out of curiosity?
What's that?
How many parts sand to salt do you mix it?
We mix it.
Yeah, what's the, like,
We mix it 2 to 1.
2 to 1? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else you had for us?
I have non-public for you.
Okay, sounds good. We'll move
That's a good one.
over to regular board business. Andy, we will start with you.
I got nothing.
Okay, John?
I had, okay, a couple things. Economic development. September 27th, which is what day of the week? Wednesday, September 27th. Former Senate President, current gubernatorial candidate Chuck Morse will join us to talk about his experience in not only the state senate, running for U.S. Senate and running for governor, but also his extensive background in bootstrapping business, a successful nursery business that he has today, and the importance of what different policies and initiatives towns can do to be supportive of the business environment as well. So September 27th at the Rec at 7:30 for breakfast. The charrette report has finally been released. We have the full copy. It's available on Plan New Hampshire's website, which is plannh.org. It is an extensive document, and so definitely encourage everyone to take a look at it. A lot of exciting funding opportunities they researched for us and then put forward to us, where Stephanie Beaver-Kizza is actively writing a first draft of a federal grant as we speak. So that's super exciting. As purely as a result of the charrette and them putting this to us. So hopefully this will be the first of several grants that we put forward, and we'll also be doing a charrette presentation to the public at some point in the fall. Did we set a date?
We didn't set a date, but public can put prior to as well.
Perfect. On the budget committee, got a couple-hour meeting last night. Kind of a great planning meeting as we're transitioning into budget season here. A couple of questions that did come up that I can forward along to you, and we can have a more substantive discussion. But basically, a couple of questions around the sources of data that BudCom can use to review revenue estimates, and specifically there was a question about miscellaneous revenue that we can go over, and then there were some questions about the current hiring process for the new highway personnel, bookkeeping for the highway, and then some questions about reconciliations. I think that we can kind of take those, particularly the reconciliations, one offline. But I committed to getting answers for the budget committee to those various questions. Have I missed anything, Jack?
No, you got it.
Okay. So yeah, that's what I got.
Was there any discussion at BudCom about a few of the things we've floated here, like separating out all electric budget items onto a different sub-budget to kind of account for solar as we buy out solar, have those conversations, those types of conversations?
No, the only thing that on solar that came up yesterday was whether or not we were interested in, we were gonna be pursuing the purchase of the system, which I
We
said,
already decided to.
which I said yes to. But in terms of like aggregating the budget line items, I did not raise that with the budget committee. But,
Rick LeBrecq and Rob Wolfchuck met with Revision last week, I believe, to start that process of purchasing. So they were gonna discuss some action items, the maintenance agreements of the solar panels. And then they're working with Tom S. to facilitate a walkthrough of the solars before we move to the next step.
That's what I got.
Russ?
So my update might take a little bit, maybe give that call go and then finish with my update, if you don't mind.
Paul?
Sure. Yeah, so we went to the DOT 10-year meeting, and was there for the Brentwood rep, and
Or was that trans modulation or whatever it was called? So,
Yes,
yeah.
I don't know, some acronym.
GACIT.
Yeah. But there was also discussion about the Route 125 corridor and the South Road. We're still waiting on the audit report to come back on that. I know the DOT director still speaks about that being expedited and a priority. I mean, there were all the other projects as part of the 10-year plan. There's like one in Newcastle with the bridge up there, and other plans along the 125 corridor. But the one that pertained mostly to us was the expedited one along South Road. I guess we're just gonna wait and see what happens with the audit. That should be coming, in any day. Planning board, we met a couple of weeks ago, and there was, took jurisdiction of the project over by where the castles is, and they're talking about removing the castles finally and putting in a warehouse building. So we'll be reviewing that for purposes of wetland impacts and buffer and water. Is there anything else, Doug? From
No, that comes up Thursday.
that was it?
Okay.
Yep.
I'll give a quick school update and then we'll go back to Russ. The first school board meeting of this school year was on the 11th. A couple dates just to put in people's minds for future planning. To make it work better for multiple different schedules, the school election night where the budget will be approved for the school is gonna this year, for 2024, is gonna be on Wednesday, March 6th. It had historically often been on a Friday, and so the hope is that might be easier for some folks. So for people who are interested in going and voting on the school budget, that will be Wednesday, March 6th of next year. That's it before the town elections, so just to put a pin in that date. Some other dates of interest, the SAU public hearing for the co-op budget is on October 16th for folks that are interested in going to that. That will be at SST. And the preliminary SAU budget that's been released was discussed at this meeting as being a 3.2% increase, which will be discussed at that October 16th meeting. There were some updates given at the Swayze meeting about the new superintendent who has been doing well in her first year and working on some goals. Swayze's working on some of their own goals, including trying to adopt an environmental or green goal for the school and the school board, which I thought was a really good idea. One financial update from the school, how much money comes back from the school to the taxpayers has been very variable over time. It was a little bit higher during COVID for some obvious reasons, and this year is lower, partly due to some unanticipated costs. The amount that was anticipated to come back to taxpayers is about $36,000. That's potentially going to go up somewhat because it sounds like in Concord, there were some changes made to the adequacy formula, which is the amount of money that Concord sends to the towns to pay for education.
So there's $68,000 extra that's going to be coming to fund for Swayze pupils. And the school board had the option of either refunding that to taxpayers or holding some town meetings to add that to the budget. It sounds like it is probably likely gonna just flow back to the voters. So some of that money will be going back to offset our tax rate this fall, so stay tuned for that. And otherwise, it sounded like the school year was off to a really good start, and current enrollment is about 280 students over there at the school. And sounds like things are going really well over there, and they have a new reading teacher who just started this year, and that so far is going really, really well. So everybody was in a good mood and happy with a good school year start over there. And that's my update for there.
Can I just add something to that?
Sure.
The superintendent reached out to the library, and we set up a community connections chat at the library on November 8th at 5:30. And she will make herself available to the town to discuss, progress. and
Great.
so forth.
Wonderful, thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, Russ, over to you.
So, last week, as you know, I covered the Conservation Commission meeting. There's a lot to discuss, but as I'm sitting here thinking about it, at some point, I'll report out, but I do wonder if it kind of crosses from being a committee update to what really should be an agenda item. So maybe just between the two of you, speak up if you think that's
Maybe you
where
can
we're headed.
tee it up to be a future agenda item next week or something like that.
Yeah, I think, the other thing is that going into that meeting last week, I'm very mindful that you and Andy, have met, you previously met with Mark Young, who has since, the two things aren't connected. He resigned as chair, but, point is, you two were trying to be helpful, trying to assess what's going on, where are we, where do we want to go, and we're already identifying, and Andy as being the representative for the board, are identifying some challenges
Yep.
that exist with the commission. So a lot of that's on the record, but we have not had a chance to really talk about it since then. I guess a couple of things off the top. So Bob Stevens was previously the chair. He, as I understood it, wanted to step aside, and Mark Young stepped into the chair position. Mark Young resigned, leaving the chair position open, and to my knowledge, there's been no vote on a new chair. Are you aware of anything? Okay. There was certainly not a vote last week when I was there. But Bob Stevens certainly was running the meeting and acting as chair. So number one, I guess, is, whether that's,
I believe he was vice chair, so.
He was
in the
probably
absence of a
acting chair.
Yeah.
But there was no
but
vote.
but there needs to be a vote on the chair,
Yes,
right?
I would
Okay.
think so.
I'm not suggesting he was doing anything he shouldn't be doing, I'm just saying that there was no vote to replace the chair.
Okay.
And you might ask, Russ, why didn't you bring that up? The reason I didn't bring it up is because it was a 2.5 hour, pretty contentious at times meeting. And when it came to personnel stuff, I figured, let's reset here and sort of figure it out going forward. But so anyway, there needs to be a vote on who will replace the chair. I believe, and Karen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there is a recommendation for Becky Dunham to go from an alternate to a full-time member.
I had heard that, but I haven't.
You haven't
They'd
seen
Bob
it?
Stevens hasn't
They'd have to
confirmed
discuss
it.
That would have
that
been
as
at
well.
that meeting.
Yeah, I believe it was done at that meeting, if I recall correctly. It was at the beginning of a very long meeting, but I seem to recall that's what happened. But now the second piece of that, which is Karen getting some notification, that hasn't happened.
Correct.
So that when that does happen, then we vote to accept or not accept that recommendation, all right? Okay. So those two things outstanding. I've also been made aware that by multiple people, and I think you've reported this publicly here, that there's an issue with alternates not showing up pretty consistently. So where to go with that? Whether it's a case of asking those folks, hey, are you no longer really interested in doing this? In which case we need to find other folks to apply. So right away you can see 3 personnel issues related to the commission that really do need to be addressed, pretty much right away, as soon as possible. And there we would have, again, we certainly have the potential for one opening that we need to advertise?
Yes.
For an alternate.
But it could end up being more. So I guess the one alternate position, though, we could advertise right away?
That's assuming that Becky is moving from an
Okay.
alternate position to a full member.
So what's the action item there then, Karen? Is that something that
Normally
you
the
could
chair
reach
would
out to
notify
Bob?
her that.
Normally, the chair would notify me on what decisions were made at the meeting, and then I would put forward the appointments of 2 folks.
So how to proceed on that?
So I think
You-
that's at a standstill until the next meeting,
They need to elect a
and
chair.
they need to elect a chair and then decide if Becky's gonna fill that full membership, or whether they wanna post for a full member and leave Becky as an alternate.
See, but my belief is that really what's outstanding is you getting word of the vote on the 13th.
So if they did vote, then I would just need Bob to reach out and complete the appointment slip, or I can complete the appointment slip to go forward to you folks at next week's meeting.
Is something that would you be okay reaching out to him to prompt him perhaps? Because that would at least be something that could get moving on this. And then, there's a pretty long history with this Fuller property decision. We had a pretty healthy, and sometimes maybe not as healthy, no, I think it was mostly a healthy discussion. The Fuller property had previously been denied by the Conservation Commission. And then there was a request to have it reconsidered, and it passed 5 yeses, 1 no, with Bob Stevens abstaining.
To reconsider
This was
or to revote?
this was accepting, going forward with the Fuller property. So Selt was there, Jeremy from Selt, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Luigi. And he was going to get with Bob Stevens after that meeting and try and get this process moving as quickly as possible to acquire the Fuller property for conservation easement. Then there was a much more spirited.
Sorry,
Yeah,
so Bob Stevens abstained.
yeah.
He is in charge of engaging with Selt to move forward?
Yeah,
He abstained because his company has done professional work for Salt, so he would have the possibility of making money off the acquisition, so he.
Well, but okay, even, again, same question, like, shouldn't he not be the one in charge of?
Well, now he's just acting as what the Conservation Commission asked for.
It's really not him as an individual, right? It's Concom makes a recommendation as a committee to us, as a select board, to acquire the property, correct?
I think it's a good question.
Yeah.
It just seems anomalous to me.
Yeah.
I think it's a good question. I also wasn't exactly clear if he was, if he was abstaining in the end on that vote, should he have been involved in any discussions related to the property leading up to it? I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, that's how it went down. There were 5 yeses, 1 no, and 1 abstention. The Webb property decision was, it's a property on Pine Road, industrial, and it was, Bob Stevens was advocating for having an appraisal done and a wetlands review done. And so that was a question on the table, and that, you know, there was a lot of discussion there about intent and whether the idea was, you know, in Bob's view, that we would use this money from the warrant article to purchase this property and then turn around and sell a portion of that property to an industrial interest and conserve part of it. So that's where the conversation got a little animated, with a number of people in the audience and on the commission arguing against this idea that the town would be in the business of essentially flipping real estate, and that was not the intent of the warrant article, and on and on. So ultimately, that did not go. That was denied. The idea that we would, that the commission would spend money on those 2 things that could, I think, have the potential of being maybe 15 grand, 16, somewhere in that neighborhood. So that was voted down after quite a bit of discussion. Swayze property, Dexter Swayze was there and asked to defer to the next meeting, so nothing moved on that. During the discussion on the Webb property and the whole industrial, property question, Bruce Stevens was in the audience and specifically asked that I check with Karen about whether it was even legal for the town to do that, to purchase property and then sell it based on language and all that. It's a semi-moot point because it was voted down anyway, even getting it started. I guess it's not a moot point because it could come up again. But Karen, I don't know if you have, it's kind of a lot to absorb, but I don't know if you have anything else on that insight-wise on Bruce Stevens' question about the legality of it. He said check with DRA.
You could sell and dispose of parcels of land, but I wouldn't use, these bond funds wouldn't be available for that purpose. So you could use other budgetary dollars to do that.
The conservation bond wouldn't seem appropriate for.
Not the way in which this bond is written, no.
And then I guess the last thing on that is, and then there's the consultant, the idea of hiring a consultant. Bob Stevens reported out that he has not, I guess Mark Young interviewed someone, but Bob Stevens said he has not followed up on that yet.
Who is he? Bob is not?
Bob Stevens has not yet followed up on Mark Young's initial discussion. So the last thing on that is the email from Rob Wolfchuk related to open space bond and all that. And again, I don't know how much of that we're gonna hash out here since it's not an agenda item, but I do wanna be responsive so that we have some kind of plan. So what are your thoughts on how we proceed?
I think when some of the friction with Concom first started coming to light, I had a conversation with Rob because the original open space bond was back like in 2003 or something, like 20 years ago. And I was asking about that was before I lived here, about how did that work? And I started to get the idea of sort of how it worked. And I think what might be really helpful is if we could have some people with knowledge about that process maybe come to this board And I know that there was a PowerPoint that went around to us by email that I found like super helpful, and sort of tell us how that process worked 20 years ago, and is there any part of that process that we should maybe reinvigorate now, right? And not like recreate the wheel, because they had like a whole process in place, and it was more of like, my impression is it was more of like a pre-planned reach out model, that they looked at properties and reached out to landowners and said, like, we think your property might be really good to conserve for the town, would you be interested, instead of the opposite direction? And so I wonder if, to avoid recreating the wheel, if we could learn about how that process worked, with that there was an open space committee, and maybe cherry pick the best parts of that and see if we need to recreate any of that. Now, that's just sort of my top line thinking. I don't know what the rest of the board thinks, but it seems like there was a lot of expertise and a lot of work and a lot of smarts that was involved in that bond back then. And now we have a new bond, so could we pull some of that expertise forward? Even if it's different people, if some of those concepts could be pulled forward, I wonder if that would really help our current board and Concom's current board get on the same page, maybe?
It just, I like that idea a lot. It just seems like there's a huge gap in terms of what the objectives are for different
And intentionality,
individuals.
yeah.
Like, we're not pulling in the same direction, obviously, so, I like that idea, and we need to figure out a way to, identify what the objective is, like what is the mission that we're trying to achieve, and then get on the same page to march toward that objective.
In my talks with Rob, there was a survey done of large open spaces, and it was ranked between agricultural, soil, aquifer, and all that. And there was a top 10 hit list, so to say, of the most valuable land as in conservation in town. And that list still exists of what they had done back then.
Seems like it might be worth just when I was reading through that PowerPoint, there was obviously some stuff that's old and maybe doesn't apply, and things have changed and the laws have changed, but some of it may still be pertinent. You know, there's probably change of ownership of properties, but to your point, I think if there was sort of that wish list, like, I don't remember how many, it was like 15 or 10, how many properties did we acquire on that bond, do you remember? I want to say it was like 10-ish, or it was a decent amount, but I don't know what was left on that wish list, if there's things there we should be going after. Seems like it would just be a shame to sort of be trying to recreate a process when we have some of that framework there from before.
So as far as takeaways or action items, just to review maybe, and maybe add one. So Karen, you're okay with reaching out to Bob Stevens about the Becky Dunham appointment, which again, I'm 99% sure happened.
I think it would be also reasonable for this board to give a directive to that board that they have to appoint a chair at their next meeting. That's just sort of standard, regulatory, meeting
So to that end.
process.
So
She agrees.
I guess to that point though, like, one of the things about this is that I don't think anyone from that meeting on the 13th is here, other than me. So, anything I've said that may be, not exactly how someone remembers it, I'd like to give them a chance to, talk that through, certainly Bob Stevens, Rob Wolfchuk, Bruce Stevens, were doing a lot of the debate, were involved in a lot of the debate, not to mention the other commission members. So I guess I just wonder, because the other thing here is the no-show with the alternates not showing up. I don't wanna let that just sort of slide. I don't know, what do we do?
We
I
had
guess.
discussed that at this meeting at one point,
Right,
and I don't remember where we left that. Did we have an action item that we were gonna check with?
I think
New Hampshire
Karen's gonna see
Municipal,
what
I
the process
forget.
was to remove
We had briefly talked about that we were gonna look into how we might remove an alternate, whether we asked them to step down, or whether there was a removal mechanism. Did that get on a to-do list at one point?
I think it's on conservation, on rec commission. They have a rule that says that if you miss so many meetings, that they would interpret that as a resignation. And some towns have policies that are by boards that say how people are appointed, how they fill the seats, and how you are removed. So maybe implementing something like that. Is a
We don't
standard document across
necessarily
all
have a town
We don't.
policy about that though, but we could potentially just create one as a select board that would deal with this problem. Okay, so we can certainly consider that.
So, what about having a discussion on the agenda for next week or something where we can allow Bob, Rob, Bruce to follow up on some of these issues?
Sounds like a long meeting.
It does. I mean, I'm
I
already.
mean, I think at some point, yes, if we, as long as I think we're really clear about what decisions we're trying to make so that we can stick to that. I mean, I think we need super, super clear, actionable outcomes of that discussion.
So, the idea of the Conservation Commission is that they advise us.
Correct.
So, I might even, my thought here, just throwing it out there, is maybe for us to tell them what we need from them. Maybe even like before that group discussion happened, like us as a team here decide, this is what we need you to make a determination on, advise us on, you know, whatever those points are. And that's the instruction we are giving you. And then we can look forward to your report back when you come up with a solution, but then have that meeting. I'm just my idea.
Do you want me to meet with Rob? I had already reached out to Rob to see if he could give me some of the highlights, and that's when all of those PowerPoints came through. Do you want me to meet with him when he gets back? He's supposed to be back in town this week. And then I can gather him and I can go over the history and how they got to where they were, how they.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanna do that offline, because I think,
Instead of tying up 2
to
hours of
John's
meeting.
point, yeah, that might be fine. To John's point, I'm not really sure what I want from Concom. If maybe it would be better served by having an open space committee that, or if we need a different process, or if we need a consultant that works with an open space committee. Like, I just want a smooth process that works and helps us use the bond efficiently. So maybe if we can get that information offline, you can bring that to us. We can have a discussion about what we think the best gold standard process is for the town. Then we can ask Concom, can they meet our needs and can they do this? And we need them to do this. Maybe that's the way to go, and then have them come back to us. Because I'm not 100% sure what I need them to do, because I don't really understand what the best role would be for a consultant or open space board, or what we need to pull forward, like on this wish list of properties. You know, I think there's a lot more information. I think we need more people involved than just a volunteer Concom board. And I'm not sure I understand right now what other moving parts we need to make this work. I don't know if the rest of the board feels like they do understand that.
Definitely don't.
So I just think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the discussions related to staffing and a couple other things, and whether they were whether enough progress had been made on the warrant article happened a while ago here at this, at this meeting. And so I guess my only concern is just that we don't allow it to slip much more. And I completely understand what you're saying and what you're saying. Makes sense, so I'll go with whatever the majority decides. But a little concerned that the issues that were raised a good couple of months ago are still here, and maybe having them into, or at least the current vice chair, in to talk and allowing the others who have quite strong opinions about it, and informed opinions about it as well, having previously served either on the Conservation Commission or the Planning Board, or, so these aren't folks who are just walking in the room blind. They do know the history, and they do have constructive dialogue to offer. So that's my concern, is that, they like most of them, they meet monthly, so it's a slow process to get back on track. So I'll just leave it there. And the other thing is, I'm not the normal representative. Andy is, so I also defer to him because he has much more background in these meetings. I went to one, so there we are.
I've been to two, so.
So you have twice as many.
And I will say, Angie and I had met with Mark, like you said, and then Mark ended up stepping down.
Right.
But I will say,
No
a few
connection, by the
things-
way, no connection.
hopefully not connected.
Yeah.
A few things, to my mind, have actually improved. There were some major issues about all discussions being done in non-public, which it sounds like has had a major improvement. And the Fuller property, which had been denied, it sounds like is going to come to this board for approval. So I actually am cautiously optimistic that there's been a few changes already, but 100% hear you that we're already almost
Fair
2
point.
years
Yep.
into a 5-year cycle. So hopefully we will continue to push this ahead. So you think maybe having those prelim discussions with those folks offline, and then maybe bring to us kind of the highlights of what we might need to bring forward of that old process? Okay.
And maybe some tailored objectives to help.
In terms of the use of a consultant, the use of an open space board, how those interface with Concom, and sort of clarification of the intentionality and the cost savings and tax impact for the voters of doing these things, I think will be really helpful. Okay. Thank you. Anything else from your other
No.
committees or boards? Okay. Any other board business?
I have legal and personnel for non-public.
I'll take a motion to go into non-public for legal and personnel.
Second.
We'll take a roll call for that. Andy?
Aye.
Scott?